If you've ever heard about Christianity, or any religion for that matter, you would have come across the question, does God exist? Now, as kids, we usually just take our parents' word for it. Whatever mom and dad says is true is true. But as you get older, you'll find that you'll start to question some of these things for yourself. And you might come up with questions like, is God real? How do I know that God exists? And what evidence is there for God's existence? In today's video, we'll be tackling questions like these. You ready? Well, let's jump into it.
Tell the world you want to know. I'm brand new. Brand new. I'm brand new.
Before we get into the question of God's existence, first, I think it's helpful if we understand what evidence is. Now, evidence is facts or information that make something more likely or less likely. Evidence is not proof. Evidence helps prove if something is true. Many atheists think that there is only one type of evidence, and they think that evidence can only be found if you use a scientific method. And so they only count evidence that can be tested with your senses or can be repeated in a lab, when in reality, there are actually many different types of evidence. If we think the scientific method is the only way to help prove something, well, we won't make it very far in life. You see, the scientific method deals only with nature, and the God of the Bible is not a part of nature that's just waiting to be discovered, like gravity or something. Actually, the God of the Bible created the universe. He's outside of it. He's not a piece of it that we can come across and test, the way you might test a river for bacteria, or the way you might observe plants doing photosynthesis. Now, since God is not nature, the scientific method will never be able to tell us either way if there is a God or if there isn't, because it's actually addressing the question from the wrong category. If we try to find evidence for God using the scientific method, well, that would be like trying to find evidence for a clothes designer by observing and doing tests on a pair of jeans. It's like taking a look at the jeans that you're wearing, and then checking the pockets, smelling them, tasting them, freezing them, and boiling them, and then coming back and saying, you can't find any evidence for a clothes designer, so he must not exist. You see, if we want to find evidence for a clothes designer, we need to start looking in a different category. If you can understand the clothes designer is not made out of cloth, and he's not a part of the jeans that you're wearing, well, then you can make some progress and start looking for a different type of evidence in a different way. And it's like that with God and the scientific method. We need to look at a different kind of evidence. Besides scientific evidence, what other types of evidence are there? There's also historical evidence, circumstantial evidence, logical evidence, mathematical evidence, philosophical evidence, and forensics evidence. Let's take forensic evidence, the type of evidence that we use in court to help solve a crime. Now, we use forensic evidence to help prove something that we can't repeat. Suppose one day you left a jar of cookies on the dining table one morning, and when you get back home from school, the jar is empty. What happened to the cookies? Maybe your dog ate them. But you notice the jar was still standing upright on the table, and if your dog got to the cookies, he would have knocked the jar over and made a mess. Then you look over and you realize that the window is open. Maybe that bully from school climbed in your house through the window and stole them. But then you remember that when you got home from school, your mom was home and so was your brother, and they would have noticed if somebody climbed in through the window. Maybe your brother ate them. So you walk into your brother's room, and you notice there's an empty plate in there with some cookie crumbs on it. Then you turn and you see your brother, and you notice that around his mouth, there's some crumbs. Now, your brother has a regular habit of eating your snacks. So you ask your brother, and it turns out he confesses, and he says that he ate your cookies. The evidence in this example was pointing towards your brother as being the cookie thief. Now, evidence is not proof. It's possible someone else found a plate with crumbs on it and put it in your brother's room. But seeing as your cookies were missing, and there were some crumbs around your brother's mouth, and your brother has also been known in the past to eat your snacks, it seems pretty likely that he's the person who ate your cookies. Some of the evidence might point towards the bully, but most of the evidence is actually pointing towards your brother. Okay, so now we know how evidence works. What is the evidence for God? The first cause. We know from life experience and from history, from science, and from logic that every event has a cause. We know that rain doesn't fall from the sky for no reason. Glass doesn't break for no reason. And flowers don't bloom for no reason. Each of those events has a cause. Take a look around you. Everything that you see only exists because something else caused it to exist. I look in this room and I see a lounge, a guitar. I look out the window and I see trees. Now, I know that each of those things only exist because either a person or natural events cause those things to exist. We know from science that the universe began to exist from an event that we call the Big Bang. Now, the cause of this Big Bang, or the cause of the universe existence, has to be immaterial because it's outside of the universe, outside of time, and outside of space. It also has to have a will of its own because it caused the universe to exist. And it has to be all-powerful over the universe because it created everything in it. Now, oddly enough, that's exactly who the God of the Bible reveals himself to be. The only other option is to believe that we can have events without having causes. Now, that's plain absurdity. For thousands of years, the God of the Bible has claimed to be that first cause. It should also be said that the first cause of the universe, the God of the Bible, exists outside of time. He has no beginning. He did not begin to exist. So, unlike the universe, he is eternal. So what sounds more likely to you? Either events have causes, like history and experience and science show us, and God is the first cause, or certain events don't have any cause, and nothing shows us this. Ask yourself which way the evidence points. The next bit of evidence comes from what's called the fine-tuning theory. If you stand back and observe our world, it seems as if somebody has monkeyed around with the rules that govern our world to make life possible. And so if you take one of these rules or one of these facts and change it just a little bit, suddenly life becomes impossible. It's as if everything has been finely tuned to allow life. Here are the facts. Our planet Earth is the perfect distance from the sun. You see, if it were a little bit closer to the sun, it would burn up like Mercury and Venus, and life would be impossible. And if it were a little further away from the sun, it would freeze like Mars, also making life impossible. The outer layer of our planet, called the crust of the Earth, is just the right thickness to allow for life. If the Earth's crust were as little as 50 centimeters thicker, it would cause the ocean's tides to rise, covering the entire surface of the Earth in water, making life impossible. Now, the Earth is a globe, but it actually sits at a bit of a tilt towards the sun. Now, this tilt allows us to have regular seasons, and it allows the atmosphere to keep us warm throughout the night. Now, if you were to remove this tilt, then actually what would happen is, during the nighttime, the side of the Earth that isn't facing the sun would actually freeze every night, and it would make life on this planet impossible. Our planet is in the Milky Way galaxy, which happens to be a spiral galaxy. Now, where Earth is actually situated between two of the spiral's arms. Now, the reason we can see the arms is because there's so many different suns that are close together. And if we happen to be inside one of those arms, next to all those suns, there would actually be so much radiation coming from the suns, from all those little stars, that life would actually be impossible on Earth. And we would also probably have the risk of being wiped out from all the exploding stars because they're so close together. If you look at all the other galaxies that are out there, I know there's more than we can count, actually about 80% of what we can observe aren't spiral galaxies, they're oval-shaped. And this means that in all those other galaxies, there's no safe spot for life in any of them. Out of all the planets and moons in our solar system, Earth is the only one that has a total solar eclipse. Now, the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but it's also 400 times further away. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means that when the sun and moon eclipse, they eclipse perfectly. And this allows us to study the surface of the sun. You see, if the moon were a little bit smaller, during an eclipse, things would be too bright and we wouldn't be able to see what's going on. And if the moon were just a little bit bigger, well, during an eclipse, we wouldn't be able to see the sun at all. And so, because they're aligned perfectly and are the perfect distance apart, we are the only planet that can study the sun's surface. Because of the total solar eclipse, we've learned about new chemicals and new elements, and almost everything that we know about stars has come from us studying our own sun. So ask yourself, why is the only planet that has life on it also happen to be the only planet with a total solar eclipse, in the perfect position to study the sun and make observations about our universe? Coincidence? There are dozens of other unique things about our planet that if you change them just a little, life would become impossible. So what's the best way to explain all this? You remember that example that I gave earlier about thinking that a clothes designer doesn't exist because you can't find him from testing your jeans? Well, it would be foolish to think that that pair of jeans came about all by itself in a cotton field. And it would be foolish to think that because it's not likely. Think about it. What are the chances that some cotton plants are going to grow, mix together, and maybe the wind somehow helps and a lightning bolt strikes, and then slowly over time they grow into a pair of jeans? And that's exactly the same thing that atheists will tell you happened, although instead of making a pair of jeans, it made life on this planet. But could all this fine-tuning happen by chance? Scientists like John Lennox and Robin Collins have calculated the odds, and the odds are 1 in 10 to the power of 40,000. That's more than the number of atoms in the universe. So, to give you an idea, let's say that you and I, we go to the beach, and let's say we get there and you close your eyes. Now, while your eyes are closed, I pick out a grain of sand at random. Now, what are the odds that you turn around, you open your eyes, and you pick out the exact grain of sand that I picked? Now, we would have a better chance of being able to do that 100 times in a row with no mistakes than we would of fine-tuning happening by chance. Do you think it's more likely that all these events happen by chance? Or do you think it's more likely that someone put us here? The final piece of evidence that we'll look at today is around the resurrection of Jesus. Here, you have Christianity Part 1, where some guy named Jesus, who had no political power, gathers together 12 disciples and he starts teaching in Jerusalem. Then over here, you have Christianity Part 3, where there is this massive eruption in the Roman Empire of hundreds of people claiming to have seen the risen Jesus with their own eyes, even dying for their claims. You have thousands of people converting and giving their lives to Jesus, and this spread of Christianity, it infects all of the Roman Empire, which was the biggest institution the world had ever seen, and it outlasts it. And this growth of Christianity continues to get bigger to this very day. Now, in the middle of Christianity Part 2, all that you have is Jesus' death. Those are the facts. The best way to explain how he moved from Christianity Part 2 over here to Christianity Part 3 is that Jesus did, in fact, rise from the dead. A miracle. Now, it's no secret that people with integrity will die for something that they believe in. But it's not likely that people will die for something that they know is a lie, especially when there's nothing to gain. You see, we have to remember these people were eyewitnesses. They weren't some people who heard the story secondhand and then believed. They knew what really happened. Paul, one of Jesus' followers, wrote a letter to a church in a place called Corinth during the 1st century. Now, this letter is recorded in the Bible. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, in this section, Paul suggests that his followers, if they doubt him, well, they should go and ask some of the hundreds of other people who also saw the risen Jesus with their own eyes. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why would Paul, this ancient figure, why would he include such a thing in his letter if it didn't happen? Is it more likely that hundreds of people who had nothing to gain willingly went to their deaths for a lie? Or is it more likely that Jesus did rise from the dead and these people were just telling what they saw? I think it's most likely that Jesus did rise from the dead and people really saw it. And they traveled around telling others that Jesus claimed to be the way to eternal life. What else could be the motive? And that brings us to the end of this video. To recap, we first looked at what evidence was. Then we looked at the idea of a first cause. Basically, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. So the universe must have had a cause. And that cause was God. Then we looked at the fine-tuning of our world. And we saw that it looks a lot like somebody wanted us to be here. Because if you take our world and you change just one thing a little bit, life suddenly becomes impossible. And third, we saw that the best way to explain the explosion of Christianity is with the resurrection of Jesus. So, does the God of the Bible exist? I'll close with this. I can believe that there are false witnesses to God. But what I cannot believe is that God has left himself without witness. Thanks so much for sticking with us up to this point in the video. If there are other questions that you guys have, drop them in the comment box down below. We'll be releasing new videos every week, so don't forget to like and subscribe so that you guys get notified. And also, please feel free to share this video with friends. We'd be happy to engage with any other questions that you guys have. So with that said, it's about time to bring this video to a close. So I will catch you all in the next one.
Tell the world you want to know. I'm brand new.